The first sensation Ryder Kane experienced was the pressure. It gripped his chest and head, the weight of suffocating airlessness making him gasp for breath. His eyes flickered open to the dull glow of red emergency lights inside a cramped stasis pod. He tried to sit up, but the metallic restraints around his wrists and ankles jerked him back. "Prisoner 1047, Ryder Kane," a cold, monotone voice echoed from an unseen speaker. "Designation: Cersis IV Penal Colony. Sentence: life without parole. You are now property of the Corrections Department." The pod hissed and lurched forward, its hydraulics groaning as it prepared to eject him. Through the small viewport, Ryder glimpsed flashes of the alien world outside, thick, writhing foliage that shimmered as though alive, and skies tinged in deep, violet streaked with harsh orange clouds. His stomach twisted. With a jarring crash, the pod slammed into the ground, the impact throwing him against the restraints. A moment later, the door unlatched, releasing him into the open air. Ryder stumbled out, shielding his eyes from the strange sunlight. The world was disorienting, like stepping into someone else's nightmare. The jungle was alive in a way he had never imagined, trees with bark that pulsed faintly as though they were breathing. Thick vines curled and slithered over the forest floor, recoiling slightly whenever his boots came too close. Giant, bulbous plants swayed rhythmically, expelling faint clouds of shimmering spores. Ryder instinctively pulled the thin cloth of his jumpsuit over his mouth, wary of inhaling anything too deeply. He turned at the sound of other pods crashing down nearby. One landed close enough for him to see its occupant. A wiry man with sunken eyes who staggered out, his expression a mixture of confusion and rage. Ryder took a cautious step back. He'd been around men like that before. Dangerous, unpredictable. Other pods opened in the distance, spilling out convicts of every kind, murderers, thieves, and gangsters. It was clear they all shared the same question. Why this? Why here? A sharp beep drew Ryder's attention to his wrist. The metal bracelet he'd been shackled with now displayed a dim green screen showing his vital signs, his location as a blinking dot, and cryptic text reading, "Objective. Survive." He sneered. No kidding. As night fell, the convicts instinctively banded together in small groups, building makeshift camps to keep the unknown dangers of the jungle at bay. Ryder ended up with 3 others. Marlowe, a hulking brute who wielded his rusted knife like it was an extension of himself. Dixon, a twitchy, middle-aged pickpocket who wouldn't stop muttering. And Reyes, a quiet woman with calculating eyes who clearly wanted to be anywhere but there. "Anyone know what the hell this place is?" Dixon asked, his voice trembling. "This ain't no penal colony. This is a freak show. Look at those trees, man. They're moving. I swear they're moving." "Shut up," Marlowe growled, dragging a fallen branch toward the makeshift fire. "You're making it worse." Ryder said nothing. He was focused on the jungle, scanning for signs of movement. It wasn't paranoia. Something was out there. He could feel it. The rustling in the undergrowth was too deliberate, the silence that followed too unnatural. Even the air itself felt heavier as the sun dipped below the horizon. As the firelight flickered, Ryder caught sight of a shadow darting through the trees. He froze, gripping his knife. "Did you see that?" he whispered, but the others either didn't hear him or chose to ignore him. It wasn't long before the first scream ripped through the night. It came from another camp not far from theirs, a piercing wail of terror that cut off abruptly. Ryder and his group scrambled to their feet, their makeshift weapons raised. "What the hell was that?" Reyes hissed, her voice low and sharp. "Stay close," Ryder said, moving toward the sound. The jungle seemed to close in around them as they approached the other camp, the air growing colder with every step. When they arrived, the scene was chaos. 3 convicts lay scattered, their bodies contorted in grotesque poses. One man's chest was split open, but there was no blood. Just an oily black substance that seeped into the ground, absorbed by the earth as though it were feeding. "What could do this?" Marlowe whispered, his bravado gone. Ryder knelt beside one of the bodies. Ortiz, a man he'd spoken to briefly earlier, stared up at the sky with glassy, terrified eyes. Ryder reached out to close them, but stopped when he saw the veins on Ortiz's neck. They were black, bulging, and pulsing faintly under his skin. Ryder jerked back. "We need to go," he said, his voice firm. "Now." Before anyone could respond, the jungle around them erupted in sound. Low growls, shifting leaves, and the wet squelch of something enormous moving in the dark. Ryder looked up and saw it. A massive silhouette, hunched and vaguely humanoid, its limbs elongated and shifting as though it couldn't decide on a shape. Its glowing yellow eyes locked onto him, and Ryder felt a chill unlike anything he'd ever known. "Run!" he shouted, dragging Reyes to her feet. The group scattered, sprinting blindly through the jungle as the creature's guttural growls grew louder behind them. Ryder didn't look back, but he could hear it. Its heavy, deliberate footsteps, the snapping of branches as it pursued them. When he finally stopped, gasping for air, he realized he was alone. The jungle had swallowed him whole. Somewhere in the distance, another scream echoed, followed by silence. Ryder gripped his knife tighter and leaned against a tree for support. The bark beneath his hand shifted, the texture rippling like muscle. He pulled back in horror. The jungle was alive, and it was hunting them. Ryder hadn't slept in 3 days. Sleep meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant death. He had found no sign of Marlowe, Dixon, or Reyes since they had scattered. The jungle's twisted logic of sound and distance made it impossible to tell if they were alive or already part of the nightmare. He had learned quickly. The jungle thrived on movement, its living flora responding to even the faintest vibrations. The only safety came from stillness, though even that felt temporary. By the 4th night, Ryder stumbled upon a clearing, a rare, open space in the dense, claustrophobic jungle. The silence was unnerving. He had come to expect the constant hum of alien insects or the rustling of unseen creatures. Here, the quiet pressed against him like a held breath. In the center of the clearing, a figure stood with its back to him. At first, Ryder's heart surged with hope. It was a person, another convict, their jumpsuit unmistakable. He took a cautious step forward, relief creeping in. But something about the figure was wrong. Its posture was too stiff, its limbs unnaturally long, and then it moved. The figure twisted sharply, turning its head 180 degrees to face him. Ryder froze. The face staring back at him was familiar, too familiar. It was Ortiz, the man who had died days ago, his chest split open like some grotesque experiment. But Ortiz's face was wrong. His skin shimmered faintly like it was stretched too thin over something else, and his eyes were dull and glassy. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Ortiz," Ryder whispered, knowing it wasn't him. The thing that wore Ortiz's face took a step forward. Its movements were jerky, like a puppet controlled by an amateur hand. Ryder backed away, clutching his knife. "Stay back," he warned, though his voice betrayed his fear. Ortiz, or what was left of him, twitched violently, his limbs snapping into unnatural angles as his body began to change. His neck elongated, his jaw unhinged, and his arms split open, revealing writhing, sinewy tendrils. Ryder stumbled back in horror as the creature shed the last vestiges of its human guise, morphing into a grotesque amalgamation of flesh and alien muscle. Its torso was a patchwork of faces, human faces, stretching and screaming silently beneath translucent skin. The creature lunged faster than Ryder thought possible. He barely rolled out of the way as its tendrils slammed into the ground where he had been standing, leaving deep, steaming gouges in the earth. Ryder scrambled to his feet, his instincts screaming at him to run, but the jungle seemed to shift around him, vines and roots twisting to block his path. The creature lashed out again, its tendrils grazing Ryder's arm. A searing pain shot through him, and he looked down to see his skin bubbling where it had made contact. Black veins began to spiderweb up his arm. He hacked at them with his knife, the blade slicing his own flesh, as he screamed in pain. The infection stopped spreading, but left his arm a raw, throbbing mess. Desperate, Ryder turned and sprinted toward the denser jungle. The creature pursued him, its form constantly shifting, arms sprouting into legs, its body flattening and stretching to slip between trees, like a predator born of nightmares. Ryder had never felt so small, so hunted. His lungs burned as he ran, but he knew stopping meant death. Or worse. He burst into a thicket, tripping over an exposed root and tumbling into a shallow ravine. He landed hard, knocking the wind from his lungs. Above him, the creature loomed, its glowing yellow eyes boring into him as it slithered down the ravine's edge. Ryder's hand closed around a rock, and he hurled it at the thing, buying himself precious seconds as it recoiled from the impact. In his scramble to escape, Ryder's fingers brushed against something cold and metallic half buried in the dirt. He pulled it free, a rusted handheld flare gun. Without thinking, he aimed it at the creature and pulled the trigger. The flare shot out, striking the thing in the chest. It screeched, its body convulsing as the flames licked at its flesh. For the first time, Ryder saw fear in its movements. Taking advantage of its distraction, Ryder bolted deeper into the jungle, ignoring the throbbing pain in his arm. He didn't stop until he was certain the creature was no longer following him. When he finally collapsed, his body shaking with exhaustion and adrenaline, he realized he was near a cave entrance. The dark, gaping maw offered no promise of safety, but it was shelter, something he desperately needed. Inside the cave, Ryder found remnants of a camp, an empty food ration tin, a discarded knife blade, and a notebook. The pages were warped and water-stained, but he could make out enough to chill him to his core. The entries were from someone who had been here before, another convict who described the shape-shifting entity that hunted them. The final entry read, "It doesn't just kill you, it becomes you." Ryder's stomach turned as he pieced together the implications. The creature wasn't hunting for survival, it was assimilating its prey, absorbing their forms and memories to use against the others. He looked down at his arm, at the faint black veins still visible under his skin. Whatever the creature was, it had marked him. As the cave grew colder and the sounds of the jungle crept closer, Ryder realized there was no escaping this place, not without understanding what the creature was and how to destroy it. But even as he thought that, the notebook slipped from his trembling hands, revealing one final sentence scrawled in frantic handwriting. "It knows when you're afraid. It feeds on it." Ryder's breath caught as a low growl echoed from the cave entrance. He wasn't alone. Continuation of the story, coming soon.